Yom Kippur is a day for confessions. In fact, confession is one of the main purposes of our gathering today. We will sing Ashamnu and Al-Chet over and over, acknowledging our failures again and again, in the hopes that we can be forgiven and do better in this new year. Notably, these pieces of liturgy are both in the plural. We confess the sin that we, not I, have committed. We confess not only what we individually have done, but also acknowledge that we are part of a community, part of a society where these things occur, and for which we bear at least some indirect responsibility. In this spirit, tonight I want to discuss an area where I feel that I have come up short, both personally and in my leadership of this community, and propose a way forward so that together we can do better. One of the failures listed in Al-Chet is Tesumet Yad, which literally means placing of a hand. The phrase originates in the Torah, where it appears in a list of financial sins, where someone purposely misuses property or money entrusted to one's safekeeping, and then lies under oath to claim no responsibility. In such a case, the person must return what was misappropriated, plus a 20% fine, plus a sacrifice to atone for lying about it. It's not entirely clear what Tesumet Yad means. One commentator explains that Tesumet Yad is when two people join hands in a partnership venture, but then one betrays the trust of the other by regarding the joint enterprise by lying about what one owes the other. But Tesumet Yad expands beyond such a specific situation to a general breach of trust. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory explains in his Machzor commentary, Tesumet Yad happens when we in any way dishonor the trust other people placed in us to safeguard their interests. It is when we fail to honor the trust that sustains any partnership. So on this Yom Kippur, I want to confess, Al-Chet shechatanu lefanecha betsumet yad, for the sin we have sinned before you by breach of trust. Last May, you'll recall, a sequence of tensions and hostilities resulted in an 11-day war between Israel and Hamas and other terror groups in Gaza. All told, thousands of rockets were fired into central and southern Israel, although thanks to the Iron Dome anti-missile defense system and Hamas's own incompetence, only a few dozen actually landed in populated areas in Israel. Nonetheless, 13 people were killed in Israel, and millions of Israelis had to repeatedly race to bomb shelters. Equally concerning was the impact of all of this within Israel and around the world. Street violence between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel was extremely concerning, as it threatened to upset the delicate balance that allows Israel's diverse society to function. Closer to home and just as concerning were incidents of anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, and assault across the U.S., catalyzed by the conflict. And then there was the outpouring of simplistic hot takes about the conflict promoted by influencers and politicians in the U.S. as people who have an audience but no particular expertise on this issue jumped on the bandwagon to unfairly demonize Israel. As I reflect on my own response to these events, I felt unprepared to respond as a leader of this community. Al-Chet, Israel engagement is not something that I have prioritized in my first several years here. In part, this is because other things attracted my time and attention, including our response to the pandemic. But it is also because I was afraid. Israel, even among Jews, can be a contentious topic. Within some Jewish families, attitudes towards Israel that were obvious and straightforward among older generations have been called into question by their children and grandchildren. Commitment has been replaced by apathy and even at times by hostility. And I've often found that American Jews tend to treat Israel as a screen on which to project their own feelings about what it means to be Jewish, treating Israel as a symbol or abstraction or American political issue rather than a real place with real people to whom we are accountable. In such a context, it was easier to say and do little and focus on other things that are also core to our mission as a local synagogue. Many of us do connect to Israel individually through staying in touch and visiting friends and relatives there, by sending our children and grandchildren on educational trips like Birthright, by contributing to Israeli organizations and Israel advocacy groups in the US, and in many other ways. And I do these things too. But we do little as a KTI community in this area, and that was something I found easier to let stand rather than try to change. But that attitude was Tesumet Yad, betraying the trust of the people with whom I see myself in partnership. That partnership is beautifully illustrated by a story I heard this summer. I participated in a webinar led by Dr. Shuli Rubin Schwartz, the new chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Together we read a diary entry from 1922 written by her great-grandfather, Aaron Shimon Shpal. Shpal was a leading educator and Zionist activist in his hometown of Kremenets, today in Ukraine. But life for Jews there became untenable in the chaos following World War I and the Russian Revolution, and it became clear that he needed to leave. His soul pined for the land of Israel, but he had no means to travel there. And so instead, he found himself sponsored by relatives who paid for his passage to Denver, Colorado, about as far as you could go in the opposite direction from the land of Israel. On the train to Warsaw, Shpal met a group of Jews also leaving Ukraine, but bound for Palestine. In discussing the state of Jewry, the travelers agreed on the necessity of a Jewish state. But how could they each work to achieve it? Shpal summarized the group's conclusion in his diary, writing, "All our hopes now should be turned to Palestine and America. As in the first, so in the second, we need pioneers. In the first, to build up the land. In the second, to wake up our American brethren to give material for the building. Thus we made a compromise. Everybody's voyage is not in vain. We will all be engaged in furthering our national aspiration. In different ways, we will work for one purpose." Their train reached Warsaw, and Shpal headed for the office of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society to arrange his voyage to Denver, while his companions headed to the Jewish Agency office to prepare for their aliyah. Shpal's musing captures beautifully the feeling that Jews in the land of Israel and in Western democracies like America are fellow travelers, in this case, quite literally. Each has a different but important role to play in securing the Jewish future. Indeed, Shpal himself became a noted Jewish and Hebrew educator following his reluctant arrival in Denver. Shpal's formulation that in different ways we will work for one purpose captures for me what it means for us as part of world Jewry to work in partnership with Jews in Israel. I would qualify his formulation in one respect. American and world Jewry is valuable in and of itself, not only as a source of support for Israel. Shpal's attitude of negation of the diaspora was common among Zionists of his day. And while this question was a source of endless internal Jewish polemic in the 20th century, I would suggest that even though neither statehood nor diaspora absolutely guarantees Jewish survival and thriving, each has an important role to play in the overall health of the Jewish people. I'm glad to live in a world where there is a Jewish state. And I hope that Jewish communities outside of it, like ours, are also here for the long haul. Indeed, I spend my every working day doing my part to make that the case. But just as Shpal and his fellow travelers concluded almost a century ago, we need each other. We need each other when there is a crisis, like there was last May. And even more so, we need each other when there isn't a crisis. To be sure, there are many differences between our communities. We don't talk enough about how the kind of liberal Judaism we practice and the kind of secular Zionism that's the dominant ideology in Israel are two fundamentally different answers to the same question of how Jews should constitute themselves under the conditions of modernity. As I said, I think there is space for both, but they are different. Our diaspora Jewish identities tend to be based on family, religious observance, and the experience of being a minority in a non-Jewish society. In Israel, Jewishness is a matter of nationality, a majority culture, and an ethical system that needs to figure out how to fight wars and allocate tax revenue. Obviously, this leads to Jews who understand and enact their Jewishness in very different ways. But it is precisely because we are so different that we need each other. We each have something the other lacks that flows directly from the different ways that our Jewish identities are organized. As American Jews who live as a minority, we bring an appreciation for the indispensability of democratic values. And as Jews who live in a country where religion is voluntary and not coercive, we've developed a pluralistic range of Jewish expressions that have all learned more or less to coexist. Conversely, Israeli Jews bring the strength of living as a majority, where being Jewish is the rule and not the exception, and the sobriety earned by sustaining a Jewish army and government, often under very trying circumstances. The question isn't which is better. That's a dead-end conversation, and given that we're all sitting here in New York and not in Tel Aviv, we've all made our own decisions about the kind of Jewish life we want to have. Rather, the point is that we each bring something important to the table, and that the Jewish people can only thrive when each part helps the other be the best version of itself. So, we need each other. And when we don't show up, it's tesumet yad. It's betraying our partners who depend on us. 5782 will be the year when we as a synagogue community will start showing up more than ever before. Tonight, I want to introduce our new Ayin L'Tzion initiative, an ongoing project that will ensure that we as a community maintain ongoing connection, engagement, and support of Israel. You may recognize the name Ayin L'Tzion from Hatikva. Ulfahatei Mizrach Kahadima, Ayin L'Tzion Sofiha. And onward towards the ends of the east, an eye still gazes towards Zion. This initiative will enable and inspire us to keep our eye on Israel throughout the year, and not only when Israel makes the news. And in Hebrew, the verb form for the word for eye, le'ayin, means to look deeply into something. This initiative will allow us to deepen our understanding of Israel as a real place with real people facing real problems. Here's how it will work. Each year, we as a community will choose a particular organization in Israel working to make a difference on some issue that's facing Israeli society. Over the course of the year, we'll connect with this organization, learn about their work, and raise funds to support it. This will culminate in a communal celebration of Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day. I'd like to take a few minutes now to share with you a bit about 3 organizations that a group of congregants and I have identified. As a community, we'll choose one by vote in the coming weeks and proceed from there. Our first organization is Leket Israel. Leket Israel, the National Food Bank, is the leading food rescue organization in Israel. Leket Israel's sole focus is rescuing healthy, surplus food and delivering it to those in need through partner nonprofit organizations. Leket Israel harvests surplus agricultural produce, which is something that I personally have done, and collects cooked meals to distribute to the needy throughout the country. Our second organization is Landmarks, Young Adults for the Strengthening of Israeli Society. Landmarks was founded in 2013 with the mission to inspire collaborations between young people from all sectors of Israeli society in order to spur community activism and instill values of pluralism and social cohesion. Each project employs a different medium of achieving these aims, including agricultural labor, very Zionist, academic tutoring, and cultural events. Landmarks was launched by a group of young people in Jerusalem driven to tackle the great opportunities and challenges of Israel's diverse and complex capital city. The organization currently operates programs throughout Israel. Our third organization is the Israel Trauma Coalition. The coalition was created in 2002 to harness the collective knowledge, expertise, and experience of Israel's leading trauma management NGOs and government organizations. The ITC's 5 Gaza Envelope Resilience Centers have become the central address for immediate proactive intervention, training, and real-time relief in the area. Area residents can receive both the trauma therapy that they need, as well as workshops which strengthen community and build resilience. By creating the resilience centers, the focus changed from victim-based trauma therapy to a proactive community approach, which places a focus on strengths, resources, and a culture of preparedness and mutual help. This model has contributed to the resilience of communities not only in times of crisis, but also in times of relative calm and routine. All of these are worthwhile causes, and there's plenty more where they came from. The idea is to choose one particular area of focus each year so that we can relate not to Israel as some abstract notion, but through the particulars of a given cause. And this ongoing initiative will prompt all of us to keep our eye on Israel even when lots of other things demand our attention. And this is just the beginning. I hope to bring more Israel-related programming and opportunities for learning and discussion in this new year. Please be in touch if you'd like to help. Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'tshumet yad. For the sin we have sinned before you by breach of trust. What's so striking about the Yom Kippur confessions is that they don't change year after year. Part of us knows that in all likelihood, we'll be back here next year, confessing to different versions of those same errors. But it is my prayer this Yom Kippur, that when we're back together next Yom Kippur, we will be a community that is much more engaged with Israel, much more connected with Israel as a real place and Israelis as real people, and much better at being partners with Jews in the land of Israel. Gamar Chatima Tova, may we all be sealed in the book of life.